So recently, Netflix released a brand new original anime series called Romantic Killer. And when this was first announced a while back, I remember watching the trailer and not really expecting all that much out of it for a couple reasons, right? The first one is that typically the Netflix original anime don't end up being very good or kind of just immediately forgotten or disappointing. There have been some exceptions to that, some which have gotten popular praise that I've liked, some that I haven't liked as much. But by and large, when Netflix does their own anime series, a lot of the time it just doesn't end up turning out that well for one reason or another. And I'm not talking about like the stuff that they license and the only place you can stream it is Netflix. I'm talking like the things they actually have a hand in making, right? So it was surprising to me because of that I actually ended up liking Romantic Killer when I went and checked it out. Now, the other thing that was a little surprising about it was when I read the description for this series on Mal, right, and wherever you might have read it and you might have had the same sort of reaction that I did, it doesn't sound very interesting. And from what I've seen, that's how a lot of people kind of thought about this series before they went and watched it. It just, the way the descriptions for it, the synopses are written, it doesn't sound that interesting. So it's not something you would potentially look at and think, wow, I really want to jump on this, right? But a lot of the reviews I saw for this series after it dropped basically said the same thing, that they read the description, weren't too interested in it, but decided to watch it anyway and were very pleasantly surprised by it. So I ended up thinking, you know what? I don't have anything else I need to watch immediately. This sounds not so great, but people are saying it's more than meets the eye. Let me check it out. It's only 12 episodes. It's on Netflix. You know, it's easy to watch. Why not? And I ended up liking it. I genuinely was very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this little series. Now, there are a couple reasons why I think this stands out above a lot of the other Netflix shows. A, it does have some solid production quality, which always goes a long way. But I think the characters are what really kind of drive it home. So before we get into that, just a brief idea of what this show is, and hopefully one that gives you a better idea of what it is than the actual synopses. So in Romantic Killer, we follow our main character, Anzu. Anzu is someone who is very content with her life. She basically just comes home, she plays video games, she eats chocolate, she plays with her cat. Those are the three things that mean the most to her, and she is genuinely happy. She likes the way her life is. She doesn't have any problems with it, right? But of course, it's a life where she doesn't interact that much with other people. I mean, she has friends, of course, but she really just like tries to get home and interact with these three things as much as possible. And of course, because of that, she doesn't have any romantic interests either. And she doesn't have a problem with this. She's perfectly happy doing what she's doing. But she unknowingly ends up playing a video game, which, you know, presents itself at first as just like a kind of really bad visual novel dating sim, right? You know, you have this very intentionally crudely CGI animated female character with a bunch of like hot male characters, and the whole it's presenting itself as like a really janky visual novel, reverse harem visual novel. And unknown to Anzu, this game is intentionally not really what it seems. And she ends up unknowingly entering into an agreement where a wizard from another world named Riri will show up and basically turn her actual life into a dating sim. And she really can't get out of it unless she actually ends up in a relationship with one of multiple random hot male characters who will show up through very, you know, interesting and contrived and convenient ways into her life. And to really make it even worse for her and to sort of make sure that she tries to deal with the various male characters that will enter her life, right? Riri confiscates the three things that she loves most. Riri takes away her video games, takes away her chocolate, and engineers a scenario where her parents and her cat go away out of the country and she is left home alone. And whenever she tries to interact with video games or chocolate, something will happen to make it so that she can't, right? Maybe she'll pass out or get sick or get a weird feeling if she tries to grab some chocolate, or if she tries to go to the store, suddenly all the video games and chocolate will be gone, right? Stuff like that. And all of it is Riri's doing, and Riri does certainly take a bit of delight in kind of making Anzu miserable, even if that's not the intention necessarily, but it does create a very antagonistic relationship and an amusing relationship between the two of them, where Anzu wants nothing to do with this. She just wants to get her stuff back, but she's kind of at the mercy, in a lot of senses, to this agreement she's found herself in and to Riri's machinations and a lot of the weird stuff that Riri will do to sort of make things try to go her way and turn Anzu's life into a visual novel, right? So as a result of that, multiple male characters end up entering Anzu's life, and eventually two of them out of the three end up definitely developing feelings for her. One of them is kind of on that direction but hasn't quite gotten there yet, and Anzu has to deal with these characters in very silly ways entering her life, and two of them end up living with her through very silly, strange means that would never happen in real life but are only happening because her life has now sort of adopted the rules of a visual novel, of a dating sim, where silly, dumb, completely unrealistic things will happen to force these characters together. And of course, because of that, this show is playing on a lot of the tropes and making fun of a lot of the tropes of visual novels, of dating sims, of harem shows. And it does it, I think, in a very tasteful way, where it doesn't go all the way towards saying, wow, this is all really stupid and you should hate it. It appreciates those tropes, but still is able to make fun of it. And I think it works out because it's not saying, wow, these tropes are stupid, aren't they? It's yes, they're tropes. Yes, you're probably tired of them. Yes, they're kind of silly. And wouldn't it be strange and kind of hilarious to see them actually play out in real life, especially when the protagonist is a quote-unquote anti-heroine who wants nothing to do with it whatsoever. But despite that, Anzu does grow to care about all three of the new male characters that enter her life. She does value all of them ultimately as her friends, and even though she really hates this scenario and really, even by the end of the series, does not want to be forced into a relationship against her will, if something happens naturally, it's not like she's completely 100% opposed to being in a relationship at some point, but as her life is now, she doesn't want to be forced into one. She wants things to happen normally. So she really just does not want anything to do with this scenario. But despite that, she still grows to value all of these people as her friends and cares about them significantly, which of course helps to encourage one of them to develop feelings for her as well. So all of that, and I think just the way Anzu is portrayed, makes her the primary thing that drives this show and makes it so interesting and so likable, because she is such an interesting character and likable, and is a likable character because of how understandable she is, because of you can very easily get where she's coming from. You can understand that she was happy. She wasn't really looking for a relationship, but now through means really beyond her control, by basically random chance, she now is stuck in this scenario she wants nothing to do with. But despite that, she does kind of make the best of it in the end, and her life does, gain something by the end of it, even if it doesn't exactly go how Riri would want, and it's not how Anzu would have originally wanted it either. I think she does grow quite a bit as a character, and I think even from the get-go, she is very understandable, relatable, and likable. It also helps that Anzu is very consistently portrayed as someone who will basically do anything for her friends and will stand up for her friends in situations where it would be very difficult for regular people to do so, right? Not because they wouldn't want to stand up for their friends, but like you might find yourself in a situation where you're under a lot of pressure for one reason or another, and it kind of prevents you from standing up for your friend when you should. But Anzu's able to do it, and I think that makes her a very respectable character as well, and one that like people would want to be more like, in a sense. And that's not to say that she's like a perfect, unrealistic Mary Sue type character. She is not. She has her faults, she has her quirks, and I think that's what makes her such a well-rounded character overall. She's not perfect, but she's still understandable, likable, and has qualities that people would want to maybe try to incorporate into their own lives. And that's not to say Anzu is the only likable character. I do think most of the side characters are enjoyable enough. Kazuki is probably the, potential love interest with the most development, screen time, and the one who's the most easily likable. But that's not to say you won't like the others. That's not to say you won't like some of the other supporting characters. They definitely all offer a lot to like, in my opinion. And on top of that, I think that even though the show doesn't like properly resolve everything, I think it does end in a very understandable spot. Like, the ending works as a stopping point, if that makes sense. Because we only have 12 episodes, right? It doesn't tell the entirety of the story. What might be of concern for a lot of people is that, unfortunately, I think there is a very solid chance that this show does not get a conclusion. Now, why would that be the case? People seem to be liking it. It's a pretty solid show, in my opinion. Why would it not get more? Well, unfortunately, from what I've seen, it looks like the source material for this series has already been entirely adapted, right? The Romantic Killer source material finished back in 2020, 2 years ago, and the anime covered everything. Meaning that this sort of, stopping point ending that the show has is all we're going to have. There isn't anything more, at least not at the moment. And that's very concerning, because while I'm saying this is a good stopping point ending, that's really only with respect to a season finale, not a series finale, right? This works as a, okay, let's take a break and come back later, not a, this is the end of the show, because it just doesn't resolve everything. It really, really doesn't. It does advance things. There are certain things that get revealed, that get resolved, but the main premise of this story is not resolved whatsoever. Anzu is not in a relationship with anyone by the end of the show, and she hasn't completely gotten out of the contract, even though certain things have changed, right? So that's kind of disappointing, because it means there's a very solid chance we just never get more of this, because there is no more source material to adapt. Now, it sounds like the source material got canceled unintentionally, the author didn't intend for it to end there. So maybe it could come back. Maybe if the anime is well received, he could get to do more. Maybe we could even get an anime original second season if Netflix really wants to. The only thing that I think might kind of lean us in that direction is that the show does end with a to be continued, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. They might want to continue it but not be able to. Who knows? If this was a show that was completely anime original, or was a show that had more source material to adapt, or if the source material, even if it had caught up but the source material was still running, I would have a lot more hope in saying, yeah, it might get another season eventually. But with everything adapted, with the ending we have being the ending of the source material, it's the sort of thing that I think people need to understand before going into this series. Despite how much I enjoyed it, despite the fact that I normally would recommend it without any concern, and I would encourage, if you're listening to this video, to watch it, But you need to understand, yeah, the ending does not resolve anything, and there's a more likely chance that this does not get continued than there would be for most other anime. Because it's not unusual, as you know, if you've watched any number of anime, to have shows that just kind of stop and don't finish, that don't resolve all their stories, that don't cover all of the source material. But it's not as normal to have a series that has covered everything, but it still does not have a conclusion, right? This is a bit of a different case to what we're used to. So I think people need to know what they're getting into, because a lot of people really do not want to watch shows that don't have conclusions. And while, again, this has a good stopping point ending, it does not have a good overall series finale kind of ending. And if this never gets another season, I would perfectly understand people saying, why should I watch an incomplete show? That is a perfectly understandable reason to not watch this, and I would never, tell somebody if they don't want to watch something without a conclusion that they absolutely need to watch this, right? I get it. A lot of people just get tired of shows that don't have endings and don't want to put themselves through something and get invested in characters and plot lines that don't get resolved. So I do think you need to know that before you watch this. And that's not to say that you'll hate the show because it doesn't have a proper conclusion right now. And that's not to say there's a 100% definitive chance this never gets another season. But given the circumstances, it's important to recognize that another season certainly is not a guarantee. Just understand what you're getting yourselves into with this. But with all that said, I did really enjoy Romantic Killer, and I think that it is worth your time, even if the premise doesn't initially sound interesting, because the characters are really good, and ultimately it ends up being a much more compelling premise and presentation than you would initially expect. Just recognize the whole thing with the ending and decide for yourself if that's enough of a concern to not watch the show, or if you're still willing to watch it regardless. I think that's the main determining point as to whether you should or should not give this a watch. But certainly, I was pleasantly surprised by it, and I think you very likely will too if you give it a shot.